If you want your insights sharp and true, here's some tips I've got for you. Follow them well, you'll make the call. This is how to use AI in Qual.
Number one is you should know the difference between a general AI chatbot and AI integration into an existing software. ChatGPT, Gemini, Mistral, the Claude models, they are general purpose chatbot. They're not built for qualitative analysis. A lot of people use it and then they're disappointed. You can complete that sentence. Then some tools for qualitative analysis have integrated it, and that might be the usual suspects, NVivo, Max3D, RSTI, and they don't have integrated ChatGPT. I read that so often. No, they are actually making use of large language models, and some of them also not OpenAI models. You need to get that out of your wording. They don't have ChatGPT integrated. I have heard that so often. I also read it also in academic publications, which then has the disadvantage that it's kind of perpetuating itself. And there's also different security and data security issues around that. So if you access LLMs through an API as a company, data are not used for training generally, and you have much higher data security there and can determine where the data is processed and so forth and so on. So you cannot do that when you just subscribe to a general purpose chatbot or use a free version somewhere. Next point is context window limit. It is getting larger and larger, but you should also be aware you can't just dump 1,000 pages into an LLM. So right now it's somewhere between 200 and 500 pages that it can kind of process at once, which is good. It's a lot. It's much better than what we can process at once. But there's also things like input and output, and you will see that in the other video on coding. Then it required me to embed all the data working with general purpose chatbots. So that was a part of a prompt, which makes that also some limits how long a prompt can be. Not only the data it can upload, and there's also some limits about how much it can output. And if you ask for a very large output table, you might run into those issues. Yeah, so there is a little bit of technical knowledge that you should also be aware of. We're not expecting it can handle everything. Yeah, that's what you read. It can handle massive amounts of data. Well, that is not true. There are some limits on what you can upload and what it can process. I already talked about model choice. There's not only ChatGPT, we have tons of different chatbot options. There are also some new ones. I'll put them in the comment field below. Also some that respect your privacy more. Yeah, or also some platforms where you can access different models. So you can choose also between the different providers, not only OpenAI models, but also across different models. For qualitative analysis purposes, we still have to work with the high-end models. If I would try to run something with Llama or Mistral, well, the quality of the answers might also then lead you to, well, I better don't do this. But we have the high-end models available, and for something like qualitative analysis, I would choose those. And then for more complex tasks where I know I want like 5 things done at once, the reasoning models might be your choice. But you need to at least have heard about those so you can make some more educated choices than just kind of picking the first model that comes your way. Well, we talked about temperature and randomness, something to know about, and also to inquire. So if you work with a specific tool, just ask those things so that you know what to expect. Because if you don't know the temperature setting, you also don't know the degree of randomness you get back. If you work with a general purpose chatbot, just can ask that in a question, what's your temperature setting? So you know what you're dealing with. Next point is LLMs are not deterministic. And that also has to do with that last point. So yes, if you ask again, you will get a different answer. If you ask for themes, that should not be your final results. Ask for themes again. And they probably get about 80% overlap, and you get, something right and left that wasn't covered the first time around. Then it's up to you to make a decision with what themes you want to continue to work. So as I said, themes are not the end of the story, it's always the beginning. Because whatever you ask is not the final results, you have to then continue to work with those results. You also need to give context, give guidance, direction. This is up to you. The LLM always will give you some answer if you give it a prompt, but it's only as good as what you input. And it's not only the prompt, but also the context you provide, the way you give it guidance. So the answer are always only as good as your interaction with the LLM. If you provide vague and unclear instructions, guess what? You can't complain that the LLM doesn't work for you. If you give bad instructions, well, that's what you get out. That's no reason to reject an LLM. So iterative prompting should be the norm. So think about progressive focusing. You start with something and you read the results and you then go into more depth or do fine-tuning. You say, now I see it differently. We need to take a different direction. And then you take a different direction with the LLM. So I like this idea of progressive focusing. So think about that when you work with an LLM. Another characteristics of an LLM is also that if you give it lots of data, it tends to summarize. That's what it has been trained on. So if you throw in 20 interviews in an analysis and you ask a question, you get a rather high-level answer. If you want more detail, you have to work with subsets of the data, or then ask specifically about one specific case and you get a more detailed answer. But also within the context limit, if you throw data in up to the context limit, don't expect detailed answers. You won't get it. The point is, you need to know this. Okay, let me get like an overview. I throw in all the data, I get an overview, and then I pick one area of that, one topic of that overview or one aspect, and then I take that and go into more depth, and maybe 3-4 documents at a time. Third point here is grounding via retrieval. That means look for systems that work with so-called RAG, retrieval augmented generation, where it only works with the uploaded data. That means there is no hallucination. The newer general purpose bots can handle that better, but there is still some hallucination. So pay attention to when you work with particular tools, how do they actually access your data? Is the answer only based on your data? Well, with general purpose chatbots, you cannot expect that, but with a tool like our tool, Q Insights, it's a RAG system, so you know the answers are always based on your data only. And yes, there are issues that you need to take into account with embedded biases in the data, what the LLMs are trained on, even if you do not know only the very particulars, but there are some biases and power dynamics embedded within the training data. And for that, we don't have to, read every little document that has been put in there. So we know that everybody is biased. Yeah, so it's not only that, well, the language models are biased because it's also the bias that sits in the training data that comes from us. So it has learned from us and that bias sits in there. And so there is bias all around. That's why we need to be reflective with the results. That's all is kind of intertwined. Yeah, a first answer is not a result. We need to work with it iteratively. We need to reflect. We need to go into more depth. We need to put in context. We need to put in our interpretation, how we see it and work together. So also that, progressive focusing also has to do with being able to deal with biases and power relationships in data. That all helps to then come at answers that are generated based on the information that the LLM has, the data, and our knowledge as well. The next point is prioritize prompts that force a model to expose reasoning rather than automate. Yeah, so you see, again, it's all interconnected. You don't want automation. You don't want to press a button and let the AI do something. I mean, I've seen it also on other videos here that are done for PhDs where they kind of say, oh, this wonderful tool, and you press a button and it does grounded, it does thematic analysis according to grounded theory and according to discourse analysis and according to whatever. And I just kind of like, how on earth can somebody recommend this? There's no thematic analysis and grounded theory anyway, and if somebody has built in a prompt into a tool, that is wrong to start out with. Yeah, so we don't want automated analysis. It might sound easy, you do press a button and something come out at the other end, but then we leave everything to an LLM. If you want to get out of that black box, then also ask your LLM in the prompt already, provide reasons or arguments why you came up with that answer. Also something that you should know about LLMs, even if it kind of remembers the last step of a conversation, it never knows why it came up with the previous answer. So it's not good to, it comes up with an answer and then you ask it, like, why did you come up with that answer? So within the prompt, you already ask it for provide arguments why you come up with that answer, because the next question you ask it, it would know what the reasoning is for the previous answer. So you have to put that into the same prompt. You need to know how LLMs kind of, what's the character of LLM or the technology in order then to deal with that. The 12 tips relate to working with general purpose chatbots, because it is a direct answer to the critics who tried all of this with general purpose chatbots. If you do that, well, then you have to pay attention to all of the points that I've been mentioning. But if you work with a tool that has been built for qualitative analysis, there's less of that you need to observe. And in order to make things easier for you, I've built this tool. I've put all my knowledge on qualitative data analysis and what I've learned over time, how to work with LLMs, we put that in the tool here.
If you want your insights sharp and true, here's some tips I've got for you. Follow them well, you'll make the call. This is how to use